Hey there, history buffs. Welcome to the History from the Homestead podcast. I am your host, Thomas Carroll, and today is our special 20th episode live stream. We're currently on Facebook. I'm joined by Sarah, Rob, Elizabeth, and Corey. So, Corey, you elected backstage to go first. So, briefly tell us about yourself and what you do.
Well, I am right now. I'm the current content and communications director at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society out of Whitefish Point. Before that, I worked at a TV station for 23 years and telling a lot of different historical history stories, and I was the kind of the special content creator for 9 and 10 News in Northern Michigan that would do all these little special stories and documentaries and such. But I transitioned to the Shipwreck Society in 2022, and I've been there since. But I think the one of the questions you did ask is what originally got me interested in history is probably because of my mother. Um, as a young as a young kid, she made wreaths every Christmas, and people would come from all over the place to buy them. And we would need to, and what she would need was we called it curly grass. So there was this special place where I grew up in Fenton where we would go and cut all this curly grass, bags and bags of it. But in this field was a foundation, an old foundation. And I was always just really perplexed and amazed by this foundation. What was there? Why was it there? Things like that. So over the years, I was never really a good student in school, but I was good at social studies and history. And then again, as a young kid, the first time I ever went to the Mackinac State Historic Parks, and I don't know if anybody else has, seen Jim Evans. He was there forever, and I do believe he's still alive. But he um he was one of the musketeers, part of the British Army, and he would fire the musket, and the Mackinac just really inspired me. And then from there, as I grew and got this job at 9 and 10, and then was able to tell history stories um, just about every week. Now being at the Shipwreck Society is just kind of it's a dream job. So that's my past in a nutshell.
That's we're gonna hear. We all have the same story. So, I guess I'll pick Elizabeth. You're next. Where are you from? What do you do? And what got you interested in history?
Thank you, Thomas. I am Elizabeth Shope, and I am a park ranger at Allegheny Portage Railroad National Historic Site and Johnstown Flood National Memorial in Western Pennsylvania. And what got me interested in history was my middle school history teacher. And he just brought history alive and made it so interesting. And I loved being in his class. I didn't want the class to end. I was always sitting there wanting to learn more. So I think for me, a large part of it was just having a great teacher who made history really interesting.
Yes,
And then uh, how I got involved with the Park Service was when I was in college. I did an internship at the Lemon House, which is the Stone Tavern behind me there, doing research. And it was a great opportunity because I never considered the Park Service as a career option, not for any bad reason. It's just never crossed my mind as something that I could do. So it was great to get my foot in the door. I volunteered for the rest of my internship, and then that turned into a student employment program while I was in school, which turned into a seasonal job, which turned into a full-time job. So I'm really glad that I did the internship because it opened my eyes to the world of the National Park Service, and I love telling the stories of these two parks with visitors.
Yes, that's great. And I'm lucky enough, I've been to those parks several times because they're quite local to me. So I guess we'll just go right around the corner. Sarah, it looks like you're up. Um, well, same as everybody else. What are you doing? What you got you started in history?
Well, my name is Sarah Goodman, and I'm the museum educator at Drakewell Museum and Park, which is birthplace of the modern petroleum industry. I have been here a little over 10 years, but I have been with the Museum and Historical Commission for over 20 years now, starting out as an intern. But what got me into history, I have to share a picture with you and a little story. So I'm going to hit share here, screen one. Let's see. Is it working? I can't get no, the picture didn't come up.
Oh, yeah, I see the background, but not the picture.
Yeah, sorry. Okay,
That's okay.
so it's actually a picture of me at 3 years old at Colonial Williamsburg, and with my, at that time, 6-year-old sister. She hated it with a passion. My parents could not drag me away from all the historical demonstrators. And this is like the late 70s because my parents actually left me with the spinners and weavers and went, took care of my sister and then came back for me a couple hours later. And I grew up right outside of Valley Forge National Park, and my parents, like, it'd be dinner time where Sarah's over at the park. And I was, as you all heard earlier, I lied about my age so that I could volunteer for the Park Service. And like Elizabeth, I got an internship with the Park Service, was a seasonal with the Park Service, and then became full time with the Park Service. But I left the Park Service to actually come into the state of Pennsylvania because I wanted to stay in Pennsylvania. And I am one of the few Historical Museum Commission employees who has actually worked at, volunteered, or assisted at every site except the Joseph Priestley House. I've never been there. So, but
Wow.
yeah, it really was my mom, like Corey, who took us to historic sites. And yeah, you could never get me out of them.
I still love the story that you lied about your age to volunteer. That's so great. That's the greatest story there. Um,
Yep.
uh, Rob, I guess that leaves you as last. You being you and me being the only ones here who don't work at a park or museum.
I was just about to say that. I just came to the realization I'm the only one here that doesn't have a real job, um, or at least in the historical field. Um, yeah, so I'm Rob Hilliard. I'm an author of two books now, one nonfiction about the Allegheny National Forest, which um, touched on a lot of the history of the forest. And what I didn't anticipate with it was those parts of the book ended up being the more popular parts, really, and those are the things that people were most interested in. And then more recently, a book about it's a novel, but it's based on a true story about a guy, John Scoble, who was a spy, who was a slave at the beginning of the Civil War, escaped, made it to Washington D.C. into the Union lines, and then was recruited to go back to the South as a spy. So again, obviously, historical content there. Um, yeah, I'm not my training, my degree's in biology, so I don't have any background on that front. And I tell people usually, like when I'm doing presentations and stuff, I make it very clear up front because people want to refer to me as a historian. I'm like, I'm not. I'm a student of history, but I'm not a historian. I don't have haven't done the research, haven't done the background, haven't put in the time at school. That's for sure. Um, as far as what got me interested in history, somebody asked me that just recently at a presentation that I was given, and the honest answer to that is I don't know. I remember as far back as I can remember, which is pretty long time. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I'm the oldest of the people on the call here as well. Um, But I just always remember being interested in it. And I will say one thing, um, where I grew up in Western PA, our family, I jokingly like to say that in 200 years, we moved about a mile and a half. So my family's been in Western PA since the late 1700s. Um, and basically, we've lived on the same farm or where my dad lives, where I grew up, since 1872. So about 150 years there. I think when you're in the place where your family has been for so long, you just kind of absorb some of that history, and um, when we had people in the family who were like, oh, well, your great 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 grandfather did this, or your, well, in my case, I got to count great 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 grandmother. She was actually, this is a true story. She was, living on the frontier, was captured by natives, taken away with her baby, and was in captivity for 2 or 3 days, and then she escaped and made her way back to Fort Pitt. So her name's Massey Harbison. If you just Google that, you'll find the story. But like when those things are parts of your background, um, I feel like, I don't know, like, well, even as I say that, I'm like, I feel like I was born into it. But if you ask my two younger sisters, they have zero interest in history. So maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm just the oddball. I'm not sure. Not sure the answer to that question.
Yeah. Uh, well, I guess I get to go last, and everybody already knows my job. I'm the host. Um, but what got me interested was, my father was a Civil War buff ever since I can remember. But we had taken a trip to Gettysburg. I was probably 8 or 9, and we visited the Trossel barn. And anybody that's been to Gettysburg, that's the one with the cannonball hole through it. That it was I believe, a Union cannonball, if I'm not mistaken, and it's still there. And that struck a chord in me to see, that there from 1863 to it's still there. Original barn still has the hole in it, and that really grabbed me. And that was when I became interested in history. And I read every book I can get, Civil War, World War II, and everything. And that's why I kind of started the show, because, as we're going to get into, we kind of agreed backstage. Not everybody's interested in history because they make it a little too tedious, and it shouldn't be tedious. It should be fun. And that's why I do the show, and that's why we're doing this like a virtual campfire. It should be, history should be fun, and that's why I think it's a lot more people would be interested if it was like this, and not, well, as we said backstage, studying a book on certain events. Um,
Thomas, can I jump in here?
oh, absolutely! This is a free for all. Go for it.
So when you and I'm gonna very politely change your word fun to impactful.
Okay.
So what we the Shipwreck Society found the shipwreck Atlanta, which sank in May 4th, 1891. 7 people were aboard, 2 survived. And the story is amazing of how these 2 survived. But there was a note written by a gentleman called Eli Waite, where the life-saving service back then did come out and save his life. And he wrote this very, maybe it was official, maybe it was just a thank you to the life-saving service back then, that literally said, "You saved my life." But what happened with the Atlanta was it broke tow of a steamer called the Wilhelm out in Lake Superior on May 4th, 1891. And it was a schooner barge. The schooner barges didn't have engines. They barely had sails. They were very short-masted vessels. And when something broke tow, which happened a lot in Lake Superior, those schooner barges had nowhere to go. They had nowhere to hide. They had no power. So they were at the at the mercy of the wind and the waves and Mother Nature. And the vessel started going down. 7 of them hopped into the lifeboat, into the yawl, and then it overturned, and 3 of them just washed away into Lake Superior. And then the other, I'm doing my math right. The other 4 got uh, back into the boat. They finally righted it, and it made its way to the Chris Point life saving station, just outside of it, and then it rolled over again, and then 2 more went. So there was only 2 people that survived that shipwreck. It was the life saving service back then. They didn't. They thought what they saw was a log floating out in Lake Superior, but it wasn't. It was these people. And somebody, it was the Whitefish Point Township supervisor as a matter of fact, that said, hey, he ran into the life-saving station, and he's like, hey guys, there's a boat out there in trouble. And so they got everybody out there, went and they saved 2 of these guys, and one guy's name was Eli Waite, and then his letter literally said, "You did save my life, thank you." So, you know, I agree with your term fun, but impact also has a lot of that, because a lot of people, when they come to Whitefish Point, it impacts them when they're learning about these stories.
Yeah, and you make a good point about that, because that's the other part of history. It's not all roses and happiness either, which that's history's there for us to learn from. Um, so yes, you make a really good point about that. Which and anybody who's ever seen the Great Lakes knows that that's not always the best place in the world to be stranded without power.
Amen.
Well, that's something too. Being originally from the Philadelphia area, we would go down the Jersey Shore all the time. So I knew the ocean. It wasn't until I moved to Western Pennsylvania and actually had to work up at the Erie Maritime Museum and had to go out on the flagship Niagara. When somebody says lake, I think of a lake, a little lake, with a little rowboat and things. And I remember, when we went out of the bay and into the actual lake, all of a sudden my eye just got so seasick, and I just remember being up against the side of the ship, and Walter, the captain's like, Sarah, you need to breathe. And I'm like, oh, it was so much like an ocean. And all of a sudden I was putting history together of why there were all these shipwrecks in the Great
Yeah.
Lakes. Before that, like I had read about them a little bit, and I'm like, oh, these people just didn't know how to row their boat. But those lakes are actually, they act like an ocean. And yeah, that always blows my mind. So quite the impact. And there's nothing funnier than when I went up to Lake Erie, and out in the distance there was a cargo ship, and that just blew my mind that there was a cargo ship
Yeah,
on Lake Erie.
big ones.
Yeah.
Big ones.
Yeah.
Sarah, something that you said got me thinking when you said about Colonial Williamsburg, and I went there around that same time in junior high, and that has been a place that often always think about, just that stepping back in time. I mean,
hmm
it's one of my favorite places I've ever been. So when you said that, I was like, yes.
Well, yeah, you're
Yeah.
totally immersed in the time period,
Yes.
Yeah.
except, maybe hearing some traffic or a plane flying over, you kind of forget what century it is.
Yes, and it is so neat because there are so many times where in history I wish I could go back to this time period or that time period just for a few days to see what it was like. But that is a place that really it's so immersive. And you
Yep.
feel like you are back in that time.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
didn't,
Go ahead, Rob. Go ahead.
well, no, sorry. I was going to say, I didn't want to interrupt when Sarah was talking earlier, but I was going to say, we have pictures of our 3 kids the exact same thing at Colonial Williamsburg. Around they were, oh, my son was in a stroller and he's now 25, so it was a while ago. But
But you didn't leave him with the demonstrators like my parents did.
no, I might have wanted to, but I don't think my wife would have let me. But what I was going to say is, and our two girls were there too. I distinctly remember my oldest daughter would have been, yeah, probably about 8 or 7. But we have a picture of her marching behind the band that goes through each night at the
Yep.
the fife and drum. And but my son, and this might be more to your point, Sarah, earlier. My son is graduating in a month and a half with a degree in cultural anthropology. So maybe he did get infected on one of those early trips there.
Yep.
Hard to say, but and then I wanted to go back to what Corey said about it being impactful and what we were kind of chatting about earlier about how history is taught. And just to be clear, like I don't, when you're teaching history, when you're teaching any subject, you have a fixed number of days and a fixed number of hours within those days to convey the key message, right? So the easiest way to do that is to boil, let's say the Revolutionary War, which depending on when you consider the real start of that, but it's about 8 years ish of fighting. And you got to distill 8 years down to something you can convey in, 4 lessons, so you can move on briefly to the Constitution and then briefly to the War of 1812 and get through everything by the end of the semester. So you pick those half dozen events, you teach those, you hope the kids pick something up, and you move on. And so I get that, but when you do that, I think you lose that the impactfulness that Corey was talking about. It's like, well, why is this important? Well, I don't know, but it happened on, April 12th, 1774. And that's all I need to know, because I got to pass this test, right? But what is often not taught, again, for understandable reasons, is the why. And that is, I think a lot of times that's the impactfulness. Like, why did it happen in the first place? Why did all these forces, come together? Like Elizabeth, I just thinking of the Johnstown Flood Museum, that literally forces coming together, right? But it was all the stuff behind that. It's South Fork Dam, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yep.
why was the South Fork Dam there? And why was it not in good condition? And why was the hunting club there? And all those things that added up to, that catastrophic day, right? And or like Sarah was just talking about, why are all these shipwrecks at the bottom of the Great Lakes, right? Why did those things happen? And then you can start talking about those convergences that led to, okay, well, why did Valley Forge happen? Why did Gettysburg happen on the date that it happened, right? And one of the things that I've said is, I really wish, instead of people learn history with a calendar, right? Oh, this happened on this date, that happened on that date. I wish at a minimum they would teach it with a map and not a calendar, because you can start to see, like, why was oil discovered in Western Pennsylvania or commercially produced, but then why did that, the fact that it was just happening as the railroads were emerging, and then they were able to get pipeline over to Northeast Ohio. And, like, if you sort of look at that, if you look at Titusville and Cleveland on a map, they're not that far apart. And so that's, it starts to make sense. Well, okay, the oil industry, the sale of the oil industry started coming up in Northeast Ohio, right? And then from my standpoint, like with the Allegheny National Forest, which is practically right next to Titusville, they were taking lumber from there, building barrels and rafts, and they were taking them right down the Allegheny River to Oil City, aptly named, and putting the oil in those barrels and floating down to Pittsburgh, and that, or even on down, to New Orleans. But without a map and without seeing all that and being able to conceive how those forces all come together, and like we we're talking about earlier, Pittsburgh as a steel building center. If they weren't getting iron ore from the Great Lakes, but you don't necessarily realize how close that is or how that works to get there. Then people don't, it's hard for people to wrap their heads around, well, why did that happen? And you lose the impact, I think, because you're just like, well, I just know when it happened. And 5 minutes after you took that test, you forgot about it. And 10 years later, when somebody mentions it or you're watching something on TV and they reference it, you're like, I vaguely remember hearing something about that when I was in school, but I don't know why it mattered.
Rob, what you said there, Rob, is interesting because if you go to the show's website, historyfromthehomestead.com, I have a quote on there from Henry Glassy, who was a U.S. historian, and his quote is, "History is not the past, but a map of the past drawn from a particular point of view to be useful to the modern traveler." I mean, exactly what you're saying. That's it's all how we got here.
Right.
One cool thing that I've started to notice is schools had shifted to the whole STEM thing with the science and engineering and totally getting away from history and things. But I've been going to some classes on the new standards and the new teaching style, which is called STEEL, and that actually incorporates history into things. Um, so that like for your flood, okay, why did the dam break? Was it engineered properly? We put the history and the engineering together. And for us here at Drakewell, it's, that we and it's kind of hard for me. I'm a total historian. Like there's a reason I'm not a chemist or something. I would probably blow myself up if I was, um, but like we incorporate now. It's not just the history, but you put the science in there. It all blends together, and you can start talking about, you know, all the different aspects of things. So it's neat because I'm seeing it a little bit. Some of the teachers have started kind of switching their way that they're teaching, and we're not just like we're not just getting history classes now, we're getting science classes that come, and the teachers are, oh, remember in the classroom we talked about pulleys. This well is just like a pulley, and we're getting that history and that science, and I think that's great. And I think you might see more and more people trying to go study history to figure out, why do we do things this way? Well, let's look at the past. You know, why do we build a bridge this way and not that way? Well, let's look back here and figure out what they did back then and
Yeah.
why, so
I
it's it's a good thing.
I can add to that. It's a great point. That's actually one of the reasons why I love history so much. One of the other things is when you find a family member associated with said history.
Hmm.
Uh, in we had discovered two shipwrecks called the Jupiter and the Saturn that sank in 1872. And on one of them was the great, and I'll probably get this wrong, the great 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 grandfather of this guy named John Smith. And when we released that to the public, he was like, I think that's where my great 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 grandfather went down. And we ended up taking him down there and diving on where his grandfather, great 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 grandfather, passed. So associating, like, there's still people uh, that are out there that have family ties to everything that we all
Hmm.
do, and it's very important to them. Like, I can't even imagine, like, nobody knew where the Jupiter was for over 150 years until we found it. So that's that's where, you know, um, history comes to life again, because he got to go down there and see where his lineage is from. So
Yeah.
it's quite powerful when we have a family member come up and part of these wrecks. And we had, I I wish I had written down all the family members, but that was a pretty special one. So
That's really
Yeah,
powerful when they can be part of what you're doing too. And Robert, you said what I say at the park all the time. I think of it like the layers of an onion, with the story of the Johnstown flood, there are just so many different factors that all came together and created the events of May 31st, 1889. And yeah, peeling back those onion layers and all of the different um, pieces that make up the story. And yeah, as well as at my park, we have family members, especially at Johnstown Flood National Memorial, who have family ties. And it's been really interesting with genealogy research and things like that, people who come to the park and they had just learned that they had family ties to the area or to the story. Some people had known, they had heard stories growing up, but there are a lot of people who have recently found ties to the story. So that's really interesting too.
Well, speaking of ties to the story, you'll probably get a chuckle out of this, but I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, the company I was working for um, was the law firm that they worked with was Reed Smith in Pittsburgh, and we were down at their offices for some meetings, going through contracts and stuff, and they have all these pictures of Johnstown and like pictures from the flood and all this stuff, and I'm like, oh, cool, Johnstown flood. And just a quick aside, I saw David McCullough, who famously wrote the book The Johnstown Flood. I saw him speak, I don't know, 20 years ago or more now, and he was also from Western Pennsylvania. In case any other listeners don't know, but when he said he was going to write a book about the Johnstown flood, and people said, "Oh, you're from Western Pennsylvania. You must know all about the Johnstown flood." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, yeah." And he said, "All I knew about the Johnstown flood was when we were kids, we would take our mashed potatoes and we get a big mound of them and put make a hole in the middle and pour the gravy in, and then smash the side down, and the gravy would run out. And we're like, oh, it's a Johnstown flood." He's like, "That's how much I knew about the Johnstown flood before I started that project." Like many Western Pennsylvanians, I was about the same. I knew of it, but didn't know the details of it. Although I had a buddy from Johnstown, and one of the things, anytime anybody, he's from Boswell, actually, Elizabeth. But their question when you mentioned the Johnstown flood was which one, right? Because there've been,
Yes.
4 or 5 major ones. But anyway, point of where I'm going with this, I finally, made some comment about the Johnstown pictures and the Johnstown flood pictures, and they're like, "Yeah, well, that's how Reed Smith came into existence." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Because at the time I hadn't read the book, and it was, and I won't get this right, but um, Reed Smith was the firm that was founded by one of the survivors of the flood, right? That sued South Fork Hunting Club, or do I have that backwards? They were
So
defending them.
there were two of the members of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, Philander Knox and James Reed. They were club members, and they also were part of the Knox and Reed law firm in Pittsburgh, who represented the club. So
Okay, so
that's
yeah,
like
it was the latter. Yeah,
the club member tie into that. But I also had always heard about the Johnstown flood. I knew there was a flood in Johnstown, but until I was older, I didn't know everything that went into the story. And I was always so surprised that, I grew up about an hour and a half from there and was always surprised that I never really learned about it in school.
yeah.
So I'm the
Well,
same. I didn't really know a lot about it.
yeah.
I knew there was a flood in Johnstown. Every time I would hear Johnstown, I would think that's where the flood was.
yeah. Uh, Thomas, if I could just jump in on that,
Yeah,
reminded me of
yeah,
one more
yeah.
thing just about how people learn about history. Um, and this is a story I tell all the time. When I was growing up, we learned about in history class, in social studies class, like somebody else said, we learned about the Homestead Steel Strike, which was 1892, I think. And they're like, oh, it was so important in the history of American labor and unions and steel barons and all that stuff. And it was we were weeks into discussing that when it finally dawned on me. They were talking about Homestead, Pennsylvania, which is like 20 miles from where I live. But we were reading out of the book and learning about, again, the dates and the, names of people and stuff. But they were like, oh, it happened in Homestead. I'm like, all right, well, there must be 1,000 places called Homestead in the United States, right? So I didn't really never thought about it. And then one day I was like, wait, you're talking about the Homestead that's right down the road, right down here on the other side of Pittsburgh? And so until you have that context, and Elizabeth, that's what you were just saying, like, you knew Johnstown, you knew where it was, and you're like, well, it was a flood. Okay, well, I don't know, what's the big deal? Until you learn the context around it and the importance of it, so much of that I think just doesn't land. It doesn't. Again, it just ends up being names and dates that people forget about 5 minutes after they don't have to remember it anymore.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I'm almost ashamed to say it, but I remember in school we went. I think like kindergarten or first grade or something like that. We went to the Johnstown Flood Memorial for a school field trip, and I'm sorry to say it was one of the most boring experiences of my life. Then, but after having read David McCullough's book and everything, I really got into it. Which, you're the author here, Rob. When are you going to write a book about it?
I'll tell you that when I started my book, and I think I said this to you when we talked the first time when I started at Freedom Shadow, I'm like, I didn't want to redo another, like, as I think I said, I didn't want to do another white guy spy story because that's been done 150 times over. I'm not even remotely going to try and outdo David McCullough. The guy's, Pulitzer Prize winning, brilliant. Got a bridge named after him here in Pittsburgh. Like I'm not like he's sitting on the top of the mountain there. I will make zero attempts to knock him off of that.
See though, Rob, you could have a bridge named after you in Pittsburgh, but no.
If I did, it would be a very small. It would be over like a sewer line or something. That would be probably appropriate for me.
We have a little one down the street here. I'll put your name on that one. How's that?
Yeah, that's perfect.
All right.
Just
And
spray painted on there.
It's not even over the sewer. It's just over a little ditch or whatever. So
yeah, ditch is
there's
good.
no sewer there. I'll give you that much. But I mean, yeah, that's it sounds like we're all over the place, even, but we're not. It's it's interesting all the links in history and our various, for lack of a better way to describe it, parts of study or what we do. With the Corey with the shipping and Elizabeth over in Johnstown, Sarah up at the oil well, and Rob, you and I, just as you said, students of history. And the other thing about history that gets me, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. I find myself a lot reading history books and saying, wait a minute, that really happened. That's not something that somebody made up. That happened. And that's crazy. I find myself saying that a lot. How much it is truth is stranger than fiction sometimes, and people do amazing things under duress or spur of the moment, light bulb or what have you. It's amazing how some things come to be, like
Yeah.
the light bulb. My goodness.
Yeah, I can. Sorry, Tom, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Go right ahead.
No, I can kind of add to that. We had found a wreck called the Adela Shores a couple years ago, and this was if you're a shipwreck hunter, this was kind of a holy grail shipwreck to find. And I got to credit our captain Daryl Ortell, who is a incredible shipwreck finder. He's just been at it. But the story is that this ship sank on May 1st, 1909. But it was the pride of the gentleman. It was pride of the Mr. Shores fleet. And he named it after his daughter Adela. But Adela did not want the I guess, the credit for naming it after her. So when they christened it, she had her sister Bessie christen it. But instead of breaking a bottle of champagne over the bow, because they frowned on alcohol consumption, she she smashed a bottle of water. And so all mariners really thought that that was bad luck. So as the story goes, on May 1st, 1909, it's following the Daniel J. Morrell up through Whitefish Point in a very bad winter where there's still ice everywhere. And it went missing. So went missing means nobody ever knew what happened to it. It just gone. 14 people, 14 souls gone. And nobody knew whatever happened to it. Nobody knew the story, but when Daryl and our organization found it, we now know where the vessel is at, and we can start, researching it and answering questions. So that's just one of the many, many stories that people forget about, whoever heard of the Adela Shores?
Yeah.
Why does it matter?
Yeah.
It does matter because 14 people died and 14 families were ripped apart because of it. So,
well, even the smallest incident has a impact on things. One of the silly shows I watch, the Titanic didn't sink. Okay. So if the Titanic didn't sink, that changes history greatly. People survive, people are born that shouldn't exist. So every little thing that happens has an impact on the outcome of tomorrow, and there's all that what if Lincoln hadn't gotten shot, what would have happened, but he did get shot. And so therefore, and that's, we learn from history.
Yeah.
It's something you think about. If Drake, the one thing about Drakewell is that many people don't know is he actually got a letter from the company that told him, cease and desist. We have no more money. Stop drilling. And Drake's like, well, I got some private funds. I'm going to keep going. And like 2 days later, boom, he strikes oil. If he had said, oh, yep, the boss says stop, poof, walked away, where would we be?
It was funny. We were talking about links and everything too. I'm going to go back to what Corey was talking about, the Daniel J. Morrell. That should probably be pretty known to Elizabeth there at the Johnstown Flood Museum because he was the general manager of the Cambria Iron Company in Johnstown. That's what that ship was named after.
Yep.
That's one of those links coming to life right here as we speak.
We have kind of a running joke in our family, Thomas, that all roads lead back to Western Pennsylvania. No matter where you're at, eventually it comes back to Western Pennsylvania. So I'll just enter that as one more exhibit in the pile there.
Well, even just Pennsylvania in general. I mean, my gosh.
So
we're known for a lot.
And it makes sense though, because if you think about even Pennsylvania in general, what do we have here? Coal. We made steel. We found oil here. The three major things that built this country. Without that coal or oil, none of those big freighters would have wrecked up on the Great Lakes. You wouldn't have them.
Yeah.
So we really were here in Pennsylvania, which, sorry, Corey, 4 of us are Pennsylvanians. You're the odd man out here. But
it's thanks to us you exist.
Yeah. It was really, really the hub.
I love you all.
Of everything.
There's a shot. Corey, don't feel too bad. My oldest daughter lives in Lansing, so
well, you guys also have the Ohio Pile River, which I have kayaked down.
We'll make you an honorary Pennsylvanian. I don't know if I really have the power.
Yeah, it's better than being an Ohioan.
Okay. Well, close enough, I
Right.
guess. It's, you know.
I apologize to all Ohio people.
They're
I
on
don't
a
even
high
know if
right now.
anybody.
They're okay.
I
No,
don't
my
Right.
even.
my
Yeah, they don't care.
Yeah,
I
I don't
mean,
know if
just
anybody.
yeah,
I don't even
my
have
boss
anybody
is
from
from
Ohio,
Ohio,
so.
so he'll kill me. I might need a job here in a little
Um,
bit. No.
well, Corey, the podcast is hiring, but I certainly can't guarantee the pay rate will be satisfactory to you. Um,
And
but
Sarah, I
you're
think of, sorry.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Sarah, I think about your point all the time about if certain things didn't happen, you know, 2,209 people died on May 31st. It's likely the number is way more than that. And, we talked about families being ripped apart. And, what great things could these people have gone on to do in their
Right.
lives had they survived the flood? Victor Heiser was a 16-year-old orphan survivor of the flood who went on to become a doctor, and helped cure diseases worldwide. And he is one of many survivors who went on to do great things, but what could all of these other people, what could their lives have been like?
Yeah.
What, as an industrial city, what could Johnstown have looked like in the years after the flood or even today, had that not happened? So yeah, that's a great point. I think about that all the time. And like you said, you can apply that to any different event that happened through history.
Mhm.
Yeah, I could I can kind of add to that, but a little bit going backwards. The on the other side, when I've interviewed Ruth Hudson, who was Bruce Hudson's mother, who went down on the Edmund Fitzgerald, and before he left on that, it was like a year or two before he left on that tragic day in 1975, November 10th, 1975. He had bought a motorcycle, and his mom did not like it. And she's like, "You're going to kill yourself on that." And he goes, "No, Mom, don't worry. When I die, the whole world's going to know."
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
and that just gave me chills again up my spine.
Yes.
But it's like what could have Bruce done? What how he was a really young guy in his 20s at that point. And what, to your point, Elizabeth and Sarah, like what was he destined for? Was it for to be on one of the most infamous Great Lakes shipwrecks, or could he have? I you know I don't want to speculate, but who knows?
And again, that could be applicable to anybody. You're talking thousands of people
Mhm.
lost on shipwrecks and over the centuries
Yeah.
there. Uh, Speaking of that, Corey, I'm trying to remember. Was it on your podcast? I heard somebody fairly recently make the comment that, and you just said it again here a second ago. You said 14 souls, and I can't remember if it was you on Thomas's podcast, but somebody I just heard recently explaining that when people are lost at sea or on lakes, they use the term souls. Was that you, or I might be thinking about somebody else?
It may have been me or Brew, part of our organization, but we like to we want to humanize these people as much as we can. So, when we use the term soul, that connects with, imagine your family having to
Mhm.
go through any of these wrecks and, getting notified and things like that. So, family member, but the souls, they're, we, we or I will usually use those terms because
Yeah.
it just humanizes and makes everything just a little bit more personal.
And that's again like when Elizabeth was talking about the flood victims. That's
Yeah.
2,000 plus souls, right? And
Yeah. And they're
and
just gone, it's sad, but
Yeah.
it's something that we can all learn from.
Yeah, and especially in a tragedy like that, where a lot of them are gone without a trace, for
Yeah.
lack of a better word. They're just, they're never properly laid to rest or anything. It's really wild to think about.
Yeah, there's a cemetery just about a mile west of Whitefish Point. It's a very, very I like, for some reason I like walking through it because it brings reality to me. But in the cemetery, there's like 21 graves that just says unknown. So a lot of these graves are from sailors who had perished on Lake Superior that washed ashore, and um, they buried them there, but nobody know who they were, and nobody knows who they are. But they're buried in this cemetery, and it's a very I don't know, heart-wrenching thing to go see, but it just, it keeps us, history. We all can learn from it every single time we go to experience something like this in all our museums and books and podcasts. So I think what we're all doing is helpful for people that are trying to learn about this stuff.
Yeah, I've always said doing the show too, even if just you give somebody that little nugget that they can go on and do your own research, form your own opinion. I mean, sometimes I can even just sit down on like Wikipedia and I'm looking up a subject, and before I know it, I'm 5 or 6 articles later, and I don't even, it don't even know how I got to where I'm at because I just clicked the link and keep one. You know, that's what I try to hope to do with the show. You just, if you catch just that one little bit and go off running with it, you'd be amazed where you end up. Even really.
Yeah, and Corey, it's like what you do, is so important to show that these people were humans, or that they were someone that meant something to someone. Not everyone that comes to Johnstown Flood, of course, has a family tie to the story. And in the one corner of the visitor center, and it lists all of the names of the victims of the flood. And there also is a cemetery above Johnstown that has the unknown plot of the victims of the flood, where hundreds and hundreds of plain white headstones are. And like you, I try to portray to people that, you look at these blank headstones, but it's so much more than that. This was someone's mother, father, friend, sibling, child, and they all have a story, and it's up to us to tell their stories.
Amen to that.
Yeah, like we were talking about, any one of those unknowns could have been the next president of the United States, or the world saving doctor or whatever. You don't know. They were
Yeah.
taken by history is about the best way I can describe it. And I don't know, maybe that's fate puts you where you're supposed to be. I don't know.
Now we're getting seriously existential.
Yeah, my goodness. Yeah.
All right, where's the actual campfire now?
Move on. Yeah, my goodness, did we go in a bad direction there?
Well, Thomas, if I'll take try and take a shot at redirecting the conversation here.
Lighten us up, Rob.
Well, yeah, that I'm good at. But I was going to say, one of the things that's interesting about U.S. history, I'll say American history, but it's, well, I'll just use an example. My younger daughter lives in Ireland. Um, and she's lived over there for a few years. And I was talking to a guy who's from Ireland one time, and he said, well, we were talking about some of the older historic sites there. And he goes, well, in the United States, 100 years is a long time. And in Ireland, 100 miles is a long distance. And I'm like, that's actually true, because we wouldn't think anything of like, well, Drakewell is probably not 100 miles from me, but in that ballpark. I wouldn't think of anything driving there and back in a day. And people in Ireland would be like, "Oh my God, you're driving 100 miles. That's
Yep.
insanity. That's a week's trip for them." Um, but the point I was starting to make is that 100 years is a long time in the U.S. Is all those linkages exist because you don't have to go very far back. And Corey, you were talking about, the gentleman whose great grandfather, whatever, was on the Jupiter, I think you said.
Yes.
And that's about 100, a little bit over 100 years, 120 years. But that's
152.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't remember the year. I remember the name of the ship, couldn't remember the year. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not that long. Like it's recent enough that there's good documentation, and you may have had, not you, but they may have had ship's logs and all those types of things to be able to look at that. And our history is still young enough that it's very easy to see the threads and follow them through. And as opposed to someplace that had maybe been settled for, many hundreds or thousands of years, those threads kind of fall apart, and you don't always have good documentation, so you lose some of that, the ability to draw those lines. And
Well, and you're right, Rob, because one thing that like we point out with the school tour children is, okay, so like I remember I was lucky enough to meet my great grandparents. Okay, my great grandparents were born in the 1900. So that's a long way back. And I was lucky enough to sit and chat with them and do. And like one thing we always say to the school children is, there are still World War II veterans alive, you know. And to kids, World War II was thousands of years ago. But
yeah,
but it's
exactly.
really not that far back. Like sit down and talk to your parents, talk to your grandma, talk to, each other, and you'll find out that like one activity that we always do as a little icebreaker when we get new interns, and this is the first year that I felt really old because I was older than the interns' parents. But we do a neat activity where, what's your first worldly memory? And think about that for a little bit. The interns, they don't even know 9/11, you know. That's how young they are. But like for me, Ronald Reagan getting shot, I remember that clearly. I remember my parents rolling the TV into the dining room. I mean, I was little, but oh my God, the TV's in the dining room, and we're watching the news about Reagan getting shot. But, and I was you tell these school children, talk to people, you know, find
Yeah.
out, sit and chat.
Yeah.
My favorite thing to do is I go up to the senior center every once in a while and just look around the room, find somebody, and I said, let's chat, let's talk.
Yeah.
That is fantastic advice. And by the way, Sarah, the older you get, the more you'll experience that.
Oh,
I
I
go back
know.
I go back several presidents before Reagan. We'll just leave it at that. Um, but but you make a great point. So again, I was fortunate enough that I knew two sets of grandparents on each side of my family. And my great grandfather on my mom's side was a World War One vet.
Hmm.
So again, people, young people think that World War II was, in the dark ages. World War One was like, before Christ, right, on their
Yep.
timeline. And but I mean, he lived until I think he passed away when I was 13, maybe somewhere in there. We used to go fishing together and hung out together and all those things. And of course, as a young kid, I didn't know any better, but I wish that I had had conversations with him and asked him about his service, because now all I have is just the paperwork I can find. And okay, he was
Yeah.
in Europe for a while, and that's about all I know. I wish I there's no way to turn back the clock. I wish I had that information.
But for these school kids, it's like you don't think you have a tie to the story we're telling, but you do. Like
Yeah.
talk to your family, talk to your relatives, start a conversation with the little old man in the doctor's office that you're sitting there waiting,
Yeah.
just start talking.
Yeah.
I
Find out
can,
that you are, what you're learning in your classroom, you know, is I lived through 9/11, talk to me. I can tell
Yeah.
you. I was part of history.
yeah.
So,
There's a story out here it's kind of a side note to this subject. Um, we did discover a wreck, a steel freighter called the Huronton that sank on October 11th, 1923. Everybody survived. It was a collision in Lake Superior between the Huronton and the Cetus. They were in fog. They were both going too fast, and the Cetus clipped the Huronton, and the the captain of the Cetus knew what was going on and did not pull back from the Huronton because he knew it would sink instantly. So he just floored the freighter, and everybody got on board off the Huronton. Everybody, but they left one soul on board. It was a bulldog. So the first mate, his name was Dixon Pell. He hopped back off the safety of the Cetus and ran down the plankway into the galley and got the bulldog and saved the bulldog's life. So it's like, everybody has a connection to animals. So like that was to me one of the like he's risking his own life for this dog. So that's also I know I'm swaying way off the subject and I apologize, but I just wanted to sometimes there's animals out there too that are a part of history. Geez, that was weird.
Well,
I liked it because that was perfect.
It's not just Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over the lantern, starting the
Yeah.
Chicago fire either.
Yes. I'm gonna say, Corey, I love it when it goes off way off the directions. Oh my goodness. Yeah, and I'm just looking at the clock too, realizing my goodness, we've been at this hour-ish, give or take. We don't want to keep everybody here all night long, although I think we probably could.
yeah.
I think we could probably stick around. So maybe here we'll start winding down a little. Maybe we'll start off with you as well, Corey, and anything new going on up at your way.
So yes, we just invested in a brand new weather camera up at Whitefish Point. Just so log on to shipwreckmuseum.com, and we have this camera that overlooks our lighthouse and also overlooks Lake Superior, and it's became one of the most popular cameras in Michigan, if not America, to be honest. I just got stats from the company, but if you log on to shipwreckmuseum.com and log on to live camera, you will see that. And we also next Sunday, not in 3 days, but next Sunday, the November 10th, we will be live streaming our 49th Edmund Fitzgerald Memorial Ceremony. So everybody log into that, and then after that, we're gonna gear up for 2025. We'll be out on Lake Superior hunting, shipwreck searching again, and then next year is the big Edmund Fitzgerald 50th anniversary. So when I say anniversary, I mean ceremony. I don't and memorial. It's not a ceremony. It's not a event. It's a memorial. So that's what we have going on right now. But I think everybody will love that new camera we have up there. So shipwreckmuseum.com, live camera. That's it.
Real quick question, Corey. Are you running the show on the thing next Sunday on the ceremony?
Yeah, can you tell my blood pressure is up?
I was gonna say, if you think about it, email me and I will try to remember to pop in.
Yeah,
Because I would like to check that out.
we've invested a lot of money in technology to make this work. Last year we had around 25,000 people log on, and it crashed our system. So
Oh, oh.
we're doing our best to keep to make this seamless. But
Well,
Whitefish
we
Point is still a very, very tough, and if you've ever been there, there's still really nothing there. So yeah, if you get lost on the beach, you make sure you look up to Whitefish Point and you can find the light and find your way back.
we didn't
The
have
light is still guiding the
25,000 people.
way.
It
Yeah.
is. That's what I always like to say. That's what the Whitefish Point is still doing what it does, guiding mariners. So it's still there. It still is an active light. It's actually the oldest active light on Lake Superior. So
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Elizabeth, I think it was you were next, I believe, if I remember. So, what's new over the hill for you up Johnstown way?
Yeah, at Johnstown Flood, we have a new item on exhibit. They are a set of train wheels that went through the 1889 flood in the early 2010s in East Conemaugh, which is one of the towns that the floodwaters went through. Big railroad yard there. They're putting in a new bridge and they found these train wheels and a date on the wheels traces them back to the Altoona shops in 1889, and they have a lot of mud still caked in them, so a visible representation of the flood. So we have those on display right now. So that's very exciting. And like Corey, we are gearing up, planning programs for next year.
I got to come up and see the train wheels too. Little interesting side note, not completely related, because as I said, we like to go off on weird tangents. The bridge that they were actually working on was the Michael Strank, I believe I said it properly, the Strank Memorial Bridge, who's a Johnstown local, who you can find him on the picture, I believe, third in from the back of the flag raising of Iwo Jima. And then he
Oh,
was
cool.
later killed in action there, and that bridge is named after him. Um, I believe that brings us to you, Sarah. So, what's new in Titusville?
Um, let's see. So we have actually gone kind of into hibernation at the moment since our exterior exhibits are all steam engines. They have gone into hibernation. But we actually this summer got a lot of neat new acquisitions. One of them being a nitro truck that we are in the process of restoring, which is really awesome. And we are working on a new temporary exhibit and things, new school tour programs, and we actually got grant money to offer free admission and free transportation to schools, so that's really cool. And well underway for the 2025 season of events and things. And I am actually proud of myself, yay, because I am actually finally, my hobby has always been domestic ways and domestic history and family life. And I have finally compiled information about domestic life here in the oil region. So, not talking about how the oil industry works, but talking about the family. And I'm looking forward to presenting that. I found some neat little tidbits of information, especially how to get oil out of your whites when you don't have bleach. So,
You're gonna have to forward that information to me because my job is working on the road crew. I deal with a lot of tack oil and stuff, and I really would like to
Oh,
know how to get that out of anything.
I will
Actually,
email you some tips. I've got some great tips. And
excellent.
in fact, this sweater that I'm wearing right now, I had crude oil all down it. As you can see, it's
Nice and
not
clean.
there.
Well, I have paving tack oil all over my pants, and I'm definitely not going to pull that up the camera to show. That would be bad. But yeah, I need to know how to get that out of anything.
Okay.
Uh, Rob, I believe that brings us to you. What's new your direction?
Well, a couple things, but before I get into those, I'm gonna put in a couple plugs for the other folks here because as we are talking about before, I haven't been to Corey's museum, but I've been up in that area. I've been to another shipwreck museum in Michigan on the Great Lakes, and I have listened to the podcast episode. Fascinating stuff, and I would definitely encourage people to go there. And Corey, two things I didn't get a chance to work in earlier, so I'm just going to drop them in here at the tail end. One, the life-saving service that eventually evolved into the Coast Guard. That, how you described that really fascinated me. Years ago, we vacationed down on the Outer Banks, and they had a similar, because of all the shipwrecks in the Atlantic there, they had a similar system where people would just, it was almost like volunteer firemen today. Somebody would say there's a shipwreck, they would all run to their boats and row out, just like you described around the Great Lakes. To me, that's fascinating. And in the back of my head, thinking there might be a book, a story there about that.
We,
So
Rob, we do have an exhibit up there at Whitefish Point that honors those folks too. So
cool. Yeah, that just I don't know, the whole concept I just think is really, really neat. And the second thing is for you, it's been on my bucket list forever to do a wreck dive in the Great Lakes. So just hearing you talk about it gets my juices flowing again to do that. I don't know if my wife will let me at this age, but we'll see about that. But anyway, and then again, we, like I've said earlier, it might be before we were on the air, but I've been to the Portage Museum and the Johnstown Flood Museum. Can't recommend it enough. And unfortunately, this is true for Drake's Well too. We're like just past probably the most gorgeous time of the year to drive to either of those places. So I don't want anybody to wait a whole year though to do that, because the exhibits there are, well, first of all, Johnstown is just a cool little town with now, didn't used to be like that when I was growing up, but some neat little bars and some fun stuff to do, ride the incline up. Don't As we're coming into the winter here, I made this mistake one time. It was snowing and I rode up it not in a car, but just standing out on it. And I don't recommend that unless you're really bundled up. But definitely go there. Johnstown's great. The museums are great. Elizabeth, the thing that was in my head that I didn't get to say to you was, it's always amazed me that with the Portage Railroad, basically the mainline canal invented the system that put them out of business, because the idea up to then was that you couldn't get a railroad over the mountains, right? And then the canal built a railroad that went over the mountains. And then I feel like the railroad people were just standing there looking at it going, well, you know what, if they can do that, like, why are we bothering to take canal boats up there? We can just take railroad cars. And within a few years, that's what happened. So, and then again, Sarah, we were talking before we were on the air here. I have some connections to Drake's Well, and just can't recommend enough for people to go up and visit that area. And like I said, that's very close to the Allegheny National Forest, which is near and dear to my heart. But just going to Titusville and Oil City, and even down to Franklin, go to the museum, check it out. Go over to Pit Hole. Come spring, go do. Actually, I found this time of year and springtime is a pretty good time to go to places like Pit Hole, because all the leaves are down and you can see stuff better and all the vegetation's down. ride the Oil Creek and Titusville Railroad, bike the trail, bike the Allegheny River Trail through there. Just, I can't recommend enough to, for people to go and do those things. So I wanted to put in a plug for everybody else here. They weren't doing enough to push their places, so I wanted to do it for them because I don't want to undersell any of those. As far as what I have coming up, we're going to be in Gettysburg 2 weeks from today, 16th for Remembrance Day weekend. And Corey, is kind of like you were saying with the Evan Fitzgerald. I want to use the word celebration, but it's not a celebration. It's the anniversary of Lincoln dedicating the National Cemetery there, which of course was the Gettysburg Address, which a couple people listening might have heard of that. But we'll be there. There's a parade. There's a lighting ceremony. Saturday, I'll be signing books at the Gettysburg Heritage Center. And then on Sunday morning, we are doing what'll hopefully be kind of a fun, lighthearted event. We're going to do a Civil War trivia contest that I'll be hosting with a couple other folks at a place called Getty's Gear, which is right in downtown Gettysburg. And then, so we got those two things coming up. We will be in Miami later in November to accept a book award that we won earlier this year. So pretty jazzed about that. And then in the spring, we will be at, I will not get this name correct. So I hope the folks there forgive me, but I believe it's the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia. It's a very long title. I think I got most of the words, maybe not in the right order. But we'll be there for their Emancipation Day events in second week of April. And we'll be talking about spies in the Civil War. So
awesome. And about the only thing new for me is we'll be right here on this show plugging away. I still have a lot of good ones coming up yet. I'm not going to give away what. Everybody, I thank you for joining me for this special 20th episode. It was a blast, and the time just flew by. That was a lot of fun. I thank you all for taking your time out of your Saturday to come and do this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks very much for having us, Thomas. It was great.
It's been great to talk with you all.
I want to meet you all in person one day.
Yes.
That would be great. Like a whole history road trip, history tour.
Well, another one of my little sayings, Thomas, and anybody who's ever ridden any distance in a car with me can, who suffered through this can attest to the truth of it. But I always say, nobody escapes without a history lesson. So that's, that's kind of the probably how all of us live our lives, or at least our avocations.
Yeah,
well,
pretty much. So
you know how dogs, it's like squirrel. For me, it's historical marker.
Yeah.
Historical marker. Pull
Absolutely.
over. We got to check that out.
I can see my wife's eyes rolling right now when I have to stop at all those things. But it's all good.
If somebody tells me it'll take 2 hours to get there, I'm like,
No.
3. Got to pull over and reread that sign.
Well, hey guys, it was great meeting everybody. I have to duck out.
Yeah.
Yep, so do I.
Yep, we've been here forever. So thank you all again. Hopefully we have more shows like this in the future.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks,
Forward
Tom.
to it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank
Bye-bye.
you.